So, ladies and gentlemen, we've heard very clearly why we need to act. So now we're going to consider how. How do we get from where we are today to where we want and absolutely really need to be? So this is critically important. At the close of COP26, all countries were mandated to return to COP27 in Egypt with more ambitious, nationally determined contributions, climate plans to achieve net zero. To help us understand what they might look like, we're very pleased to welcome Clifford Rechtschaffen, Commissioner of the California Public Utilities Commission, Pamela Franklin, Chief of the Non-CO2 Programs Branch of the US Environmental Protection Agency, and Martina Otto, who is the head of the CCAC Secretariat, the Climate and Clean Air Coalition, with responsibility for delivery of the global methane pledge. Under Commissioner Rechtschaffen's leadership, the CPUC has just introduced a methane mandate. The US EPA has issued a methane action plan, and the CCAC are to police the global methane pledge. So without further ado, I'm going to hand over to Commissioner Rechtschaffen.
It's a pleasure to be here. I'm going to talk about the renewable gas standard that the Public Utilities Commission adopted earlier this year. The background for this statute is that in 2016, California adopted a comprehensive short-lived climate pollutant statute calling for a 40% reduction of methane and other short-lived climate pollutants by 2030 from 2014 levels. You can see on the pie chart that the major sources of methane emissions in California include dairies, both manure management and enteric emissions, as well as landfills. Emissions from landfills in California are partially but not completely controlled. Subsequent to that, the California legislature passed another statute, SB 1440, requiring my agency, the California Public Utilities Commission, to consider whether to adopt a biomethane procurement program for the state's gas utilities. The staff proposed a procurement plan last year, and then in February, we adopted a renewable gas standard. And this is geared to reductions in the landfill and dairy sectors, which, as you can see, are responsible for more than 75% of the state's emissions, as well as emissions from other agricultural and forestry waste. The decision sets two procurement targets for the gas utilities: a 2025 target of 17.6 billion cubic feet, which will most importantly, help the state meet our goals to divert 75% of organic waste from landfills by 2025. And this goal took into account the existing capacity of other diversion facilities, which you can see in this chart, such as composting and other sources, and what capacity was needed to be filled. We expect that much of the organic waste being diverted from landfills will be converted to biomethane through co-digestion at wastewater treatment plants that are already using anaerobic digesters and have the capacity to process more organic waste. Then second, the decision set what we call a midterm target, which is a 2030 biomethane procurement target, and that target is 72.8 billion cubic feet per year. And that will help us meet the 40% methane reduction targets by capturing waste from both landfills, dairies, and other sources such as forest waste and agricultural waste. The 2030 target represents about 12% of what our gas utilities serve for what are called core customers, and those are residential and small commercial customers. So it's about 12% of the gas that's supplied to those customers in 2030 will come from renewable gas. My agency does not regulate industrial and other customers, so-called non-core customers, who purchase their gas directly from wholesale providers. So California will have to reduce emissions from that sector in a different way. The absolute annual procurement volume will remain the same after 2030. So we anticipate that the percentage of the load, of the overall customer load that this target represents, will keep increasing over time as gas demand decreases due to building electrification and other decarbonization efforts. The targets will be revisited in 2030. And this just shows some of the various feedstocks, such as forest, agricultural, and urban wood waste, that will be captured by this program. They will reduce not only methane, but also black carbon emissions as well. Even though it's one of the leading sources of methane emissions in California, I think it's worth noting that including dairy biomethane was controversial in the state. And that's because of concerns about pollution from dairies, which adversely impacts adjacent communities, and whether or not this procurement mandate would encourage those dairies to expand. The decision allows the utilities to procure biomethane from dairies, but in a more limited amount, and only after they have met their short-term target for biomethane produced from organic waste diverted from landfills. And we also added additional measures to address the concerns about air and water quality from dairies. The underlying statute, SB 1440, requires that any targets the Commission adopts are a, quote, cost-effective means of achieving reductions in the emissions of short-lived climate pollutants. And we approached this question in two ways. First, the decision says that the targets don't have to be the most cost-effective means, just that they are a cost-effective means. And we also, and as we interpreted the statute, this can include non-monetary costs, such as the social cost of methane. And here, the average cost of biomethane for most contracts that we expect will be in the range of 17 to 26 million metric BTUs, which is less than the social cost of methane, which in 2021 was 26 million MMBTU. And also, we hadn't found other feasible methods to address all the organic waste that must be diverted from landfills. So that's how we approached the cost effectiveness question. We included other provisions in the standard that will achieve cost effectiveness. The utilities are required to develop a standard procurement methodology that can be used in individual contracts that procure biomethane, and they can propose other cost containment measures as the decision is implemented. There's a three-tier approval process for contracts by the PUC. We call it an advice letter process, with higher levels of review depending on how expensive the contracts are. The decision includes a number of other procurement requirements that I won't go into too much detail about, but that includes requirements to encourage sustainable practices at biomethane facilities, such as using electric vehicles, limiting the combustion of electricity generated by biomethane on site, because in California, most of the biomethane facilities are in areas of severe air quality pollution in the Central Valley of California. We require tracking of through a platform, a renewable energy tracking system, and we require the utilities to maintain exclusive ownership of all the environmental attributes from renewable fuel sources to prevent double counting. We also limit contracts to 15 years, and they must end in 2040. And the reason for that is because there's uncertainty about future gas demand as electrification proceeds. And we also may want to target biomethane for hard to electrify industrial processes rather than to serve residential and small commercial customers. And then we require a procurement advisory group to look over the contracts. I think I'm out of time. I just want to have here for future reference other policies that we implemented to prepare for biomethane procurement, to standardize biomethane gas quality, injection, and regulatory processes as well as incentives for biomethane interconnection to gas pipelines. Thank you very much.
Well, I think we can give him a good chat. Thank you very much, Commissioner. What we saw there was clear, simple, and effective action to address methane emissions, one applicable to many countries' NDCs. So now we hear from Pamela to understand the mechanisms that the Environmental Protection Agency is considering to tackle methane from all sectors, but in particular agriculture and waste. Pamela.
Good morning. It's a pleasure to be here today. I am trying to share my screen. I hope you all can see that. It's a great pleasure to be here today with all of you. I am here today to talk about the U.S. Methane Emissions Reduction Action Plan, which is a bit of a mouthful, but this is a plan that was issued actually by the White House in November of 2021. It's a whole of government approach to highlighting actions and building upon previous efforts and actions that the U.S. government has taken across at the federal level to address the key methane emission sectors. And it includes both regulatory and voluntary actions. And it includes all the key sectors that are important for U.S. emissions, from coal mines and oil and gas to landfills and agricultural sources. In the U.S., some of our biggest sources of methane, which constitutes about 11% of our total emissions, include oil and gas systems at 32%, enteric fermentation at 27%, landfills at 17%, manure management and coal mining are the main sources. And so this plan does lay out actions and approaches for all of those sectors. I know that this is a biogas forum, but just want to lay out the fact that this action plan does address, again, our most important source of emissions in the oil and gas sector, and lays out a number of actions that EPA in particular is taking to address these emissions. And this really relies heavily upon regulations. In 2021, EPA issued some bold new proposals for emissions from the oil and gas sector. In particular, we received over 500,000 public comments on those regulations. We're in the process of developing a new supplemental package that will get us towards a final rule sometime next year, within the next year. And again, on the coal mine side, we're looking at how abandoned coal mines can be addressed. Focusing on the landfill sector, again, this is the third largest source in the U.S. Of anthropogenic methane emissions, second largest industrial source. So one thing we're focusing on here is building upon our existing regulatory structure for under the Clean Air Act. There are statutory regulations that limit the emissions from large landfills. And then on the voluntary side, EPA has a program called the Landfill Methane Outreach Program that provides technical and other types of assistance and information resources to help promote the capture and use of landfill gas for multiple types of end uses, including renewable natural gas. And on the other hand, we're also working to ramp up ways in which we can reduce the amount of emissions from the landfills in the first place. So working together to reduce the organics that are being emitted from landfills. And we've got a goal to reduce methane emissions by 50% by 2030. We're working on developing a variety of different types of tools to help our stakeholders in the landfill sector to reduce these emissions. So this includes working with them to identify ways in which, even after their power purchase agreements to produce electricity and to sell electricity have ended, trying to identify a whole range of different options that those landfills have beyond the extent of their power purchase agreements. We've also worked to develop a number of technical resources and tools, so looking particularly at food waste, in which we can inform our domestic policymakers, researchers, and the public about the importance of reducing food loss and waste and the environmental benefits from reducing it. And then finally, the U.S. Department of Agriculture, the Food and Drug Administration, and the EPA have all signed a formal agreement to reduce food loss and waste, which includes a number of provisions, including a lot of emphasis on educating Americans about the importance of addressing food waste, so to minimize the organics that are getting into the landfill and reducing the emissions that way. And then, you know, the bulk of this plan of the U.S. Methane Action Emissions Reduction Action Plan is focused on domestic action, but just want to note that all of these efforts are then parlayed into our international collaboration under the auspices of the Global Methane Initiative and the Climate and Clean Air Coalition. So we translate these technical resources and tools into our international work, whether it's bilaterally or multilaterally. In the agriculture sector, this is an important sector both for enteric fermentation at 27% of our emissions and manure management, which is 9% of our total methane emissions. We've got a number of different approaches, and the primary actor here is actually not EPA, but is our U.S. Department of Agriculture, which works with farmers and ranchers to identify a number of voluntary and incentive-based approaches to advance climate goals. The USDA is working and pursuing multiple work streams, including adopting alternative manure management systems and other methane reducing practices. They're launching a climate smart partnership initiative. They're working to promote on-farm renewable energy from methane capture and to increase investments in agricultural methane emissions and innovations. And just to speak a little bit about the progress that's being made under this plan, the first thing is that the USDA has released their first progress report on the climate smart agriculture and forestry. They're continuing to work with stakeholders to develop and implement strategies based on the feedback. The Partnership for Climate Smart Commodities provides up to $1 billion that would provide funding for pilot projects to create market opportunities for commodities produced using climate smart practices to either reduce greenhouse gas emissions or sequester carbon. And then there's a lot of collaboration that happens through with the Environmental Protection Agency and the Department of Agriculture, including through our voluntary AgStar program that provides outreach and technical assistance and is really focused on encouraging the use of anaerobic digesters to recover methane that's emitted from manure management systems on farms. So we're really excited about those efforts. And we, again, as in the landfill sector, continue to apply these tools and resources in our international outreach activities under the auspices of the Global Methane Initiative and the CCAC. And then, of course, this is an area in which we have developed a bunch of resources that I just wanted to make you aware of, that there's a policymaker's handbook for measurement, reporting, and verification in this sector, including, you know, we think of biogas very broadly, agriculture, municipal solid waste, and wastewater sectors. And we have developed a number at EPA, a number of tools that we've grouped into a biogas toolkit that we hope will be useful for our stakeholders. So this includes the solid waste emissions estimation tool, or suite, a landfill gas screening tool, an anaerobic digestion screening tool, handbook and operator guidebook, risk analysis checklist for anaerobic digester projects, and a cost estimating tool called Organics for managing source separated organic waste. So again, we hope that these resources are familiar to you and look forward to working with you to help you with these tools. We think they're very useful in addressing methane emissions from this sector. And then just want to say that while most of the plan itself is focusing on domestic activities and ways in which the U.S. can reduce our own methane emissions, we remain very, very committed to supporting our colleagues internationally, and you know, not only under the auspices of the Global Methane Pledge, which I believe you heard about earlier, but also in ways in which through the GMI and also in our support for the CCAC, that we can continue to help other countries that want to advance, whether it's developing their own frameworks or plans for addressing methane emissions, whether it's in pursuing, monitoring emissions verification efforts through a MRV resource center that we have in development and hope to launch shortly, and as well as through bilateral engagement. And we're really proud to be working collaboratively with the CCAC and are planning an event focused around methane mitigation and policy awareness this September in Washington, D.C., and we hope to be sharing more information about that event with you shortly. So I'd just like to thank you all so much for your attention and look forward to the discussion portion later. Thank you.
Thank you, Pamela. That was great. Again, clear actions, clearly widely applicable, and I love the toolkits and other advice that is being developed and made available. Now, finally, to Martina, the CCAC is to be the Secretariat of the Global Methane Pledge to ensure its delivery, and Martina is going to help us understand how the pledge will be implemented. Over to you, Martina.
Excellent. Thank you very much. I hope it works and you can see my slides. I'm very happy to be with you all today as well. And well, as Pamela said already, there's very close collaboration also amongst the panelists that have been speaking to you already. If you allow me, just a quick word on the Climate and Clean Air Coalition. We are a partnership of over 73 national governments and gather also 19 international organizations, over 70 non-governmental organizations, and we interact with literally hundreds of partners. The Secretariat and the Trust Fund are housed in UNEP. And we work at the nexus of climate and clean air to help put the world on a pathway that rapidly reduces warming in the near term, and at the same time really maximize development, health, environment, and food security benefits. And we see ourselves as extremely complementary to the overall decarbonization efforts. And our focus is on the short-lived climate pollutants. And we did issue the Global Methane Assessment, which was a bit of a starting point for the Global Methane Pledge. I'm sure Rick mentioned that earlier today. We supported the consultative meetings that were, well, put together in the lead up to the Global Methane Pledge, and we will have a role as one of the core implementers of the Global Methane Pledge as well. And just to well, show the slide again, Rick did speak to those numbers already. They do come from the Global Methane Assessment, and they do show not only what needs to happen to keep 1.5 degree alive, but also what is within reach. And I think that's important to keep in mind. In terms of our support to the implementation of the Global Methane Pledge, we're the first point of entry, literally, for the countries. We have a trust fund and also are looking to additional means. And through that, we offer capacity support with regard to policy and planning, key sectors. We support, for example, the hiring of national experts to build institutional strengthening as well. And we work very much on the political cloud side of things with ministerial meetings, really a communications effort. And last but not least, we work on tracking the progress, and I will speak about that in a short while as well. And this is very much aligned with the kinds of support we offer more broadly, and I just want to highlight this strong scientific base that we have, as well as the work on technology demonstrations that we have done in the past. We also offer a solutions center type of intervention with quick but small financial support to unblock key barriers that are being identified. This is a quick overview of the 6 sectors for which we have hubs, and then which is complemented by this national planning hub as well. And obviously, you see as well the 3 that are very relevant for methane. And the idea behind those hubs is to gather partners. There's a a leadership group as well, and co-leads for each of them. They're usually countries who are the co-leads, and they work on a joint vision in the given sector. It is very much about peer-to-peer exchange, a little bit along the lines of what we've already heard in the two other presentations, really getting down to the nitty-gritty, what has worked, what are some of the pitfalls, how to actually learn from that. It's about very much catalyzing action via matchmaking to connect partners in taking things forward as well. And as I said, this direct financial support for which we've set up a process that goes through an expression of interest. So it's very much demand driven. In these hubs, they're run through engagement strategies, basically, and I just wanted to highlight the two that I thought were most relevant for this meeting. And the one is on the waste sector. It does have components on organic waste management, the prevention of organic waste, diverting it from landfills, but also looking at composting and waste to energy. We also run a stream on open burning because obviously that's extremely relevant on the air quality side. Now, on the agricultural sector, the engagement strategy looks at livestock, manure management, open burning, and paddy rice. And I wanted to say that they're really very open for further engagement. And if I take the example of the fossil fuels, this gave rise to the oil and gas methane partnership that gathers by now over 70 companies as well that work on that. So it's really a place for co-creation of policies as well, and to make sure that we better target the support measures going forward. And obviously, if we go back to the financing element, it's, as I said, about matchmaking, about catalyzing funding, and where we can actually facilitate blended finance as well. This shows in a snapshot the trust fund. This year we do have 9 million. Next year we expect that number would be upped. The replenishment of the CCAC trust fund is underway. And as I said, it's a very much a bottom-up needs-based approach. Countries do express their needs for support. The hubs help to define the areas for submission of those funding requests. And then there's a process with our board to attribute that. Now, on the methane, the CCAC developed a methane flagship, which was launched at the Climate and Clean Air Ministerial at COP26. This serves as an immediate implementation support for the Global Methane Pledge. It's about engaging and mobilizing CCAC partners and other key actors, and it is about providing scientific assessments and tools. And really, it is about high-level political engagement, and here we work very closely with the colleagues in the GMI, looking at a database of methane pledges and policies, but also bringing together methane champions through high-level dialogues. And as Pamela mentioned already, there's this event that is coming up later this year, where we really want to use as a stepping stone as well to a strong message that comes at COP27. It's about the decision-making and action in key organizations, so mapping and engaging key target institutions, and engage strategically on taking the actions forward. And awareness raising, I think I did mention already quite a bit. Really this voice that is taking forward the strong call for methane action, but also having a bit of a communication strategy with that. And on the second element, I wanted to mention we have put together a baseline assessment, the tools, right? We have put together a baseline assessment. We have country methane profiles. The baseline assessment will show baseline methane emission projections through to 2030. It's coming out shortly. Country methane profiles are meant to show the scale of potential reductions and high potential priority targets in each country. And they're being put together over the summer. We do provide a framework for national methane reduction roadmaps and action plans, and there's a global methane tracker to help track progress. And I come to the end of this with my last slide. on this methane roadmap action program, where we see as a quick way to identify country needs. It is open for CCAC and Global Methane Pledge countries. It offers a series of workshops and expert consultations to help capacity and learn from each other, and therefore key building blocks that look at what data is already around that can be used to actually identify the scale of the issue, to help prioritize mitigation measures by sector. It's really key to show that countries are not starting from zero, and that we can build on a number of things that have been done or that are in place already. We look at implementation pathways by sector, and obviously then as well the monitoring. And that for us is a key part of the scaffolding that we are putting into place to make things happen. This will be complemented, as I said, through the Trust Fund, a more in-depth support that is being provided to countries that requested. I can't say which ones are in the pipeline right now, but next week we have a board meeting that will approve funding for roadmap processes in 12 countries. So that's the first starting point, and obviously we hope to grow that as we go along this year. Thank you so much.
Great. Well, thank you all very much. I think it's great to see so much progress already on developing clear action plans and toolkits that can be shared with other countries, because the only way we're going to meet these very near-term targets is by collaborating, learning from each other, and sharing. So we've now got a few minutes of questions, and we've got some great examples here of people who have been developing good plans. So first question here, can we have a mic, please?
Hi, good morning. This question is for Ms. Franklin. Can you hear me? Can you hear me? Regarding the low carbon fuel standard, which would incentivize the use of alternative fuels like the upgraded form of biogas, renewable natural gas as it's known in the US, modeled after California's model. Do you see something like that on the federal level? I know several bills have been introduced, but they've all failed. But what is the EPA's position on that?
Yeah, thank you for the question. So I can't speak to whether there will be a federal low carbon fuel standard. Definitely a little bit outside of my purview, but I know that within the EPA's work, we do have a renewable fuel standard and a variety of different mechanisms under which various financial incentives can be provided for different pathways for renewable fuels. So for example, fuels that are derived from anaerobic digesters from manure management, fuel sources, for example. So there are pathways within the EPA already, but not quite to the extent of the California program at this point.
Can I just ask a quick follow-up? Do you have a timeline as to when that might get there?
I do not have a timeline. I can confer with my colleagues who run the Office of Transportation Air Quality program and see if they have any updates for you. I'd be happy to get back to you.
Great, thank you. Do we have any other questions from those present in the room? No, and yet no online. So I think if I can just ask what each of you feel is the biggest challenge in terms of getting these methane action plans in place. We've got, I think you said 115 signatories to the Global Methane Pledge already. That means there's an awful lot of who haven't even signed up to the Methane Pledge. What do you collectively feel is the biggest challenge to getting a methane plan in each of these countries? I don't know, perhaps, Bawumia, can I start with you?
Yes. Can you hear me?
You, Samira.
Yes. I think our biggest challenge is really policy driven and government commitments to it. There's an overemphasis on the traditional sources of energy, so electricity, fossil fuels and all of that. And we need, as a matter of urgency, for governments to realize the potential in this sector, how accessible it is, how it's everywhere around us, and how it's renewable and green and clean, and potentially significantly cheaper and more sustainable for all of us. So I think it's really driven by policymakers and governments adopting it and pushing it, and civil society also, such as yourselves, to drive the conversation and make sure that we highlight the benefits of it.
Samira. Anybody else? Clifford, would you like to comment?
Have you elevated? I'm glad to see you've elevated California to a country status. We like to think of ourselves as that way. Well, cost is a big concern. The sources of methane are ubiquitous, and our program, for example, requires hundreds of digesters to be constructed, and among other things, controlling wastewater treatment, landfill, and agricultural emissions, and that requires money, that a significant amount of costs. So that is one considerable barrier, even when there's the policy will and political will.
Thank you. Martina, we'll just go around all of you.
Thank you so much. I think, political will is really kicking in. A testimony is how quickly this global methane pledge has been put together and came together. And we have some countries that actually have started reflecting methane as well at the nationally determined contributions, and I think that will be a critical one as well, to formalize that a bit more. What is important is that we get the processes in countries going as quickly as possible. That's why I've put together this quick starter program, if I may say so, to help show, number one, we can build on a lot already, so that it doesn't look as daunting, and that we're able to focus on the areas that matter at the country level, running a process that allows as well bringing on board the different actors. I think that's absolutely important, and I think we have to distinguish very much between the different sectors as well, where the problems are, and Cliff said it. For the agricultural sector, we look at many different actors. For oil and gas, obviously, it's a much more concentrated area. So it's very different from one to the other. And I think we have to take the countries where they are. And if it's a sector by sector approach, then it's that. Or if it comes as more of a planned overall global methane, country methane roadmap. So I think that's the first thing, and the second is really the policies to be put into place to drive the action further, and the third is around the financing. I stop here.
Thanks, Martina. Pamela.
Yes, thanks. My panelists have offered really great insights, and I think I would emphasize all of those factors and priorities, and just add that in our experience with the U.S. And in our work through the Global Methane Initiative over the years, we've realized that it really does take leadership from the top, because in many countries, there's lots of different ministries or departments that have jurisdiction over one sector or another. And in some countries, maybe multiple ministries have jurisdiction over a particular sector. So it's really hard to take action in a concerted way if there's not buy-in at a top level. And so I think that's in the US case, for example, having the White House issue a policy means a lot more than if just a single department issues a policy, because it's going to have a lot more buy-in from across the government and from the different ministries and departments that have jurisdiction over certain areas. So I think it's really important to set a tone from the top. And I think that's why with the Global Methane Pledge, it's really exciting that that has been signed onto at the leader level, and that can hopefully drive change from the top down. And again, every country is going to have a different set of policies and solutions to help address their methane emissions, but leadership is really critical.
Completely agree with that. I think one of the biggest challenges the AD industry has is that we're a circular economy technology and cover multiple government departments. So unless all those government departments are coordinated and talking to each other, the delivery plan is very hard to get in place. Roberta, you had a question.
If nobody from the audience has some. And the follow-up question is then, would you feel that the difficulty in creating a baseline for the methane emissions is something real, or would you feel that we know where we are starting from? Because of course, many of these are diffuse emissions that are difficult to quantify, and of course, trying to distribute financing and control the project where there is more, how can I say, the results are best for the money invested would be critical. Do you feel that this is an issue, or there is sufficient knowledge of where the emissions are?
Does anybody want to take that one?
I can take a stab at it. I think that we would agree that it's always important to focus on as best you can to quantify and to understand the nature of the problem so that you can track progress and so that you can be very clear-headed about whether the actions that you are taking are having an impact. So we, as a science-based, data-driven agency, the EPA is absolutely in support of always striving for better quantification. On the other hand, I would also say we have sufficient information to act and to take actions. On the key, we know what the key emission sources are. We know what the technologies and best practices are to address those emissions, and we have the tools to do so. So I think that it's important not to let some uncertainty block action that's really needed in the short term.
Thank you. We have another question. Is that a follow-up or a separate? Yeah, we have a follow-up question here. John?
Could I quickly come in on the data side?
Sure.
If I may.
Go ahead, Martina.
Thank you so much. Because obviously, I mean, with the global methane assessment, we've made a first effort to put forward quite a compelling set of numbers. And with the baseline assessment, we try to complement that with the projections. And as Pamela said, it's we know enough that we know we have to act and where we act in terms of the prioritization and so on. So it should not serve as an excuse, but there's always a need for more precise data for sure. And that's why the International Methane Emission Observatory has been put into place. And they will look at very much, different means, putting together, for example, satellite data and so on, to actually help with the observation, the actual observation of methane emissions, to help do away with some of the uncertainties around that. But not as a way to take away the need for action. Over.
Thank you.
Quick follow-up, Ms. Franklin. In terms of meeting the global methane pledge, the Biden administration announced that it had earmarked several billion, I believe, to cap leaky oil and gas wells that emit methane. But what about, and I think that accounts for 30+% of methane emissions. But what about the 50+ percent that come from, agriculture and food waste and wastewater? those things represent an immediate solution or a way to immediately slash methane. So has there been any conversation about what is being done? I mean, you spoke about directives coming directly from the administration being more impactful. Has that been discussed as a way to immediately address methane and, therefore meeting the methane pledge?
Yes, thank you for the question. So yeah, you're correct that the oil and gas industry systems comprise about 32% of our methane emissions in the U.S. Enteric fermentation is about 27% of our emissions, and manure management is about 9%. So the oil and gas, we're addressing those emissions through a combination of regulations as well as really specific efforts to cap wells, et cetera. So there's a really comprehensive set of regulatory actions in place. In the agriculture sector, the approach is being led by the Department of Agriculture, and they have a pretty comprehensive climate smart agriculture or sustainable forestry plan. And so they are focusing on kind of all of the above approach. I am aware it's not a regulatory approach. So they are trying to do a combination of financial incentives. I mentioned a $1 billion program to try to incentivize climate smart agricultural commodities. They are focusing very much on investments in anaerobic digesters. So they are investing a lot of resources as we speak and kind of as outlined in the methane action plan, and then articulated further and further by some of their very specific strategies. So it's a big challenge, and they're working hard to address that.
Thank you. We've now unfortunately run out of time for any further questions. I think what we've heard now, which is great, is that we have seen action plans that are being developed and in place, and therefore we've seen the art of the possible. So these are things that each one of us can take back to our governments to encourage them to prepare for more ambitious climate action. And I'd like to emphasize the role that WBA is also playing in terms of bringing together national associations and supporting national associations in their work with governments to develop methane action plans. And we are also on the leadership groups of the CCAC's waste and agriculture groups. So we're here to help, but I will end there by thanking Her Excellency Commissioner Rechtschaffen, Pamela, Martina. Thank you all very much for your contributions and making this a practical and persuasive session. And thank you too for being with us. Thank you all.